What confession did your parents reveal just before they passed away? When my dad's Alzheimer's was very advanced, he once asked me if his dad was still alive. When I gently told him no, his response was good. I hate that man. He used to beat me until I bled. My mom and I don't know if it was the disease talking or a repressed memory that snuck back up, as they were married for 30 years and he had never mentioned abuse before. My dad passed last week, and the most disgusting thing I found out is that his cousin raped him when he was about 10. This fucking piece of garbage is basically known as a pedophile in the family. He goes to Thailand multiple times a year, and not for work. But no one says anything because it would ruin their non-existent reputation. The very least I could do for him was when the sister of that cousin called up about the funeral. I told her that she could tell her fucking piece of shit family to rot in the hottest layer of hell for all the years of abuse they put my dad through. Dad could never stand up for himself, so I'll do it for him. My mother is still alive, but her mind has already begun to degrade beyond the ability to manage her lifetime's worth of lies, and they are spilling out at almost the same rate as her lucidity. Roughly 4 months ago she told me that my father never really beat her, but instead she lied to me in the courts when I was a baby, saying he was violent and abusive so she could save me because he didn't share her religion and she feared he would turn me away from God. She obtained a restraining order and no contact order under the lies he beat me and her while he was in another state caring for his mother who was in the process of dying. When he came back home he was locked out and served papers. I hadn't seen him since I was 18 months old. I found him living 2 hours away, told him who I was and he cried and welcomed me into his family. I have a wonderful half sister and a super chill and kind stepmom, but I lost 34 years with them. That I was a failed abortion. Not my parents, but their parents. My grandma was on her deathbed and told us they had hid a great deal of money in their home, but said my grandpa, who was dead already, hid the money and she didn't know where it was in the house. Grandma died and my aunt and uncle tore the whole house apart for years before giving up. It wasn't right before. But my mom once told me how she felt like a bad mother, and she pretty much itemized all the things she remembered or felt she did wrong. It really humanized her for me. There are a lot of people with good homes and good families who don't realize their parents are figuring out how to raise a person while they raise a person. Don't be so hard on your folks. A lot of them are good people trying to figure out how to make good people, and it's not always perfect, or kind, or easy, but for a lot of us they are or have tried. That's more than a lot of people can say. My cousin is my half-brother. Thanks, Dad. Your dad banged his sister or sister-in-law? His sister-in-law. Stepbro, what are you doing? Exclamation point. I think I've seen that documentary. Not me, but a friend of my parents. Shocking whatsoever. His mother died like 20 years ago, and when his dad was dying in the hospital bed last year he got told the truth. His parents couldn't have a baby so they bought him from a nun. Yeah, you heard that right. Some nuns literally stole babies like in the 80s or so. He never got any out of them being his parents. Now he is part of group of this babies who try to know who they are. They are called niños robados, stole kids in Spanish. The nun died some years ago, and a fuck ton of people still don't know the truth. Crazy. Grandma revealed to her kids that they had another sibling that died shortly after birth. It would have been their oldest sibling, so none of them could have known. Weird that they never shared that info though. An uncle had actually found out when he enlisted and had to have the family looked up, and he found out about a sister. But that information wasn't readily discussed until Grandma admitted it. Couple of years ago Grandpa was nearing the end. He was mostly blind, had dementia and spent most days asleep. One day he wakes up while my mom is out of the room. Despite being mostly blind he sees me at his bedside and call me by my mom's name. Not wanting to confuse him, I play along. He proceeds to tell me a secret he's held on to for 40 years. When my mother was little, she was best friends with a boy. This boy eventually grew up, moved away and became a member of what is essentially now the cartel. Through his connections, my grandpa heard this boy plotting home and stealing my mother away, either voluntarily or not. Not wanting his daughter to be taken away to most likely be raped and murdered, he begged a rich landowner nearby for help. Grandpa had done a lot of manual labor for the landowner for almost nothing, so he was compelled to help. They arranged for the landowner's son, my father, to court my mom, marry her, and take her away to the US. Mom never knew about any of this, and by the time the cartel guy came by to take her away, she'd already been across the border for months. I've never mentioned this conversation to either of my parents, who have been married for nearly 40 years. This entire story could simply be the ramblings of a man near his death, riddled with dementia, or it could be the truth. Some things in his stories do match up with small things my parents have mentioned over the years. Either way, I have no plans to find out for sure. Does it count if it's in the years between my mom and dad passing away? Because if it does, I have a few. My mom was always treated as a stepchild of the family. After she passed, my grandfather apologized to us, dad, brother and me, for the way he had treated us all these years. My grandfather hated my dad from the first time he went to see my mom. My dad showed up on a motorcycle with a tie-dye shirt, long hair and flip-flops, not what a farmer's daughter should be seen with. I found out that my mom was forced to have an abortion when she was 16ish. I was born when she was 24, so I would have had a sibling 8 years older. When my parents were barely dating, my dad basically raped my mom, but they ended up staying together until she passed away. My parents almost divorced because my dad assaulted a woman, slapped her ass when she was bent over, and another time because he caught the clap. This was also how I found out my dad had cheated on my mom a bunch of times. I'm sure there are more things, but that's all I remember right now. That he did have a will. Tragically, the last few days he was so out of that he thought the Vulcans were invading, so that was the last reveal. He wrote it 20 years ago and it wasn't even legally binding, so that sounded more like him. The real reveal happened after he died, told to me by my mom. Dad had always been homophobic, but had started improving the last few years of his life. Mom had been sitting on the reason for all these years, and knowing it makes some of his overprotective behavior make sense. He was molested by an older male relative, who was 6 years older, when my dad was 10. This was the 50s, so nothing was done, and now my mom and I have no clue who all knows, and who all kept it a secret. It colored how he parented me, especially, as the youngest. He wouldn't let our oldest brother be alone with us until we could speak, just in case. Our oldest brother is an awesome person, so I always thought it was weird that dad was so untrusting. He wouldn't let me go for a walk when he lived in the city, because he was worried about me getting kidnapped. He gave me the sex talk at a very young age, like 5 or 6. Mom thinks he was trying to outparent her, but now I'm thinking otherwise. I think it was so that, if someone hurt me, I would have the words to describe it and reach out for help. This ended up longer than I intended, but I guess it's one of those things that has been on my mind. My dad told me to forgive my husband for cheating on me. His exact words were, "You have a good life and a beautiful family. Don't F it up." Just forgive him for thinking with his dick, because I'm sure he didn't mean it. Of course, I had no clue that my husband had in fact cheated on me 5 years before. But, when we were sitting down one night drinking and talking several years later, I brought up what dad had said. My husband looked terrified, and that's when he told me about his one-night stand while I was pregnant with our 3rd child. At the time of his confession, we had 6 kids and I was in graduate school. I wanted to leave him. I hated him for ruining our marriage. But, it wasn't possible to go because I couldn't afford to be a single mom. I tried to do what my dad said. I pretended to forgive him and move on. It took a few years and I had to work through a lot of yucky feelings. But, it's been 16 years of marriage now, and I'm so thankful my dad's last advice was to forgive my husband. The crazy thing is, my husband never told my dad about his infidelity. But, as insane as his last words were, they saved my marriage. That I had trust fund worth over $2 million. More of a post-death reveal for my father than me, but when my dad was 40, his uncle passed away. Another uncle who had been given very little in the will started spitting out all the dirty little secrets, including that both my dad and his older brother were adopted. Took my dad 20 years to come to terms with it and search for his family. Found some siblings on his maternal side, but only one brother had known dad existed and spent most of his adult life trying to find dad. That brother died 2 weeks before dad sent him a FB message reaching out. What was your favorite story? Let me know in the comments below and don't forget to leave a like.